Hi, welcome to Version Up. Today's guest is Saraswat. It was a real pleasure for me, and I think a real value to the audience to have on the pod to talk about AI transformation at law firms. His insights go way beyond the vendor perspective as a chief revenue officer at a legal tech company. He's also a thought leader in the true sense of the word, with a long running podcast, an expert destination called Fringe Legal. I threw everything I could at in exploring the opportunities and challenges that AI brings to the legal market, and he didn't fumble a single time. I had a great time talking to him. I learned a ton about what the sticking points are for AI transformation at law firms, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Hi, Saraswat. Welcome to Version Up.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. It is a fast-changing environment, and I thought it would be great for us to talk about where we are in law firm innovation. I spent a decade in private practice, familiar with the unique challenges law firms face, and also opportunities, most importantly, that they have now with the disruption to the legal services market caused by AI. Where are we right now in the state of law firms innovating and thinking about how to use AI and other cutting edge technology?
That's a full question. How much time you got? So I spend my life, my day job is speaking to law firms, and I have the pleasure of speaking to lots and lots of law firms every day, every week, every month. And it's been fascinating to see the changing dynamics as the pace of change has picked up and frankly continues to pick up. I wrote an article about this, which if you wouldn't mind posting it as part of the show notes, that'll be helpful for your listeners. But I wanted to do that as an exercise from my conversations to help law firm leaders essentially try and do a self-assessment, a diagnostic of where do they stand. And I went with a very traditional 2x2 quadrant because I like visuals. And essentially the two metrics that you focus on are, is there institutional commitment? So is this something that the organization, the firm actually wants to put in place? And is there use case clarity? And looking at those two, you end up with what I've defined as 4 different zones. The bottom left, which is where people probably don't want to be, is the exploratory zone. So it's the zone of exploration where there is a lot of curiosity. This could be from individual teams. It could be from the lawyers. It could be the innovation teams who are itching to do things. It could be your IT teams who want to build. But there is very little structure. There's no central tracking. There's no real policies in place. But you do see a lot of experimentation, right? Individuals just getting licenses, and you may start getting what used to be shadow IT. Now it's a bit more shadow AI use cases. It's a good place to start. On the right-hand side, you have the grassroots innovation. This is where you do have strong use cases. So teams have identified, if we had tool X, Y, or Z, we could do this. So they've at least identified a problem and usually a solution or a set of solutions to get somewhere. But you do have to contend with both poor firm-wide visibility. So it just lives in one team, one practice, one office, and this silo of knowledge that gets bigger and denser, which is not an issue for that individual team. But as you're looking to scale, especially if you're in a large firm, that can become a bit of a blocker. But then we start moving into where most firms would like to start getting to. So first you have the top left, which is your innovation signaling. So you have interest from leadership, and this is where we do see a lot of fun LinkedIn posts where people are saying they're doing a lot of things. They take a lot of demos. There is a lot of pitches. Maybe they're doing POCs. They bought limited licenses for some things. From the outside looking in, it looks like there's a lot of activity. But the problem here is there are very few embedded workflows. There's very few actual use cases. So they may have done some work to get the buy-in from the leadership to say, yeah, we need to do something with AI. Those are words I've heard, exact words I've heard before. But what they want to do is unclear. But really where you want to end up is the strategic integration part, right? This is where you've coordinated your capabilities. You have clear use cases. You have active governance. You have curated a knowledge layer. Yes, you've done all of those things where you've done vendor selection, you've looked at the market, and you are continuing to be aware of what's happening in the market, but is driven by both leadership providing their support and we should do something and we need to do something so we're not left behind, so we can provide the best service to our clients. And we've identified where we know things are going to have the most impact and what's the tier 2, tier 3, and so on. So I'll pause there. I did come up with that sort of, I call this the legal AI maturity quadrant. So people can actually take an assessment, which helps you identify where you are. We can actually talk about the assessment because that was a fun thing to build, especially using AI and to add a bit of intelligence in there. But yeah, happy to pause and take questions, talk about things. And I'm curious to hear about your take on all of this. You think that kind of tracks with what you're seeing, what you hear, and what you experience in practice?
Typically, my head explodes when I look at quadrants. I think this is why I did not go to business school. I do not think in quadrants, but I actually very much like how you walk through that. It's a very clarifying way to think about less the technical part of where law firms are at, which I feel like too often the conversation is, and more so on the vision ideation, which is really critical to the strategic path that law firms are on. And so just rough shot of the law firms you're talking to, what percentage do you think at least dipping their toes into that ideal quadrant?
I think so. We'll simplify. We'll say every firm I'm talking to, let's put them in a bucket and we'll call that 100%. So I think honestly less than a quarter, so less than 25%, which already seems quite high as I'm saying those words.
Okay.
I think it's not easy. It's tough, right? Because everyone has competing priorities, especially within law firms. But I do think there are definitely a subset of law firms that are both open and willing to put in the work. They're hiring the right teams. They're actually spending the time defining use cases, and where there is a lot of signal behind the noise that you hear from everyone across the leadership team through to the people actually implementing, managing change, and just doing the work day by day. And you can start to see the patterns when you speak to the different individuals at levels or different stakeholders, because there is a commonality in how they frame things, how they talk about it. You can see that at a bare minimum, all of them within the same firm have spoken to each other. They're all on the same page. And that in itself is a huge win. So yeah, I would say something like 20-25% is what I've seen. And that's a number that's tracked up over the last 6-8 months. There are some firms which frankly were really far behind, but have put the right teams in place and managed to catch up. There are also firms which I still hear, we don't know about AI, we're just going to wait to see what happens. Right. So there are definitely those laggards there, but it's a changing field every day.
So if we can stay focused on the overachievers.
Yes.
What is the profile of that law firm? Size, practice group, region, anything that comes to mind? I'm just curious. And who are these 25%?
I don't think region is in play. They're all over, right? the global firms, they're UK, European firms, or just domestic US firms and the rest. So I think region has not been at least a factor in what I've noticed, and size as well. Generally, and this is just my bias for your listeners, I'm working with larger firms. Not to say that smaller firms aren't doing this. It's just I'm not speaking to them to know if they are or not. We'll keep the focus on the equivalent of the AmLaw 100, 200 type firms globally. But I don't think there is a magic number in whether it's the biggest firms or towards the bottom tier of that 200. They're all large firms by definition of what large law might be to one. But the team is definitely a differentiator. Most firms that I know that are doing this have a named individual leading innovation at a minimum. It may be that they're leading K&I, knowledge and innovation, but there is someone in charge of that. I've yet to come across a firm where innovation is a community function, and innovation is a community function, but someone has to be the owner where they've been able to do something here.
What have you observed with innovation leads? Do they tend to be hires from within the organization, or are you seeing external hires? And are any of those external hires coming from outside the legal sector?
So right now, it seems like there's a lot of movement within the market. So a lot of people going from one firm to another. So I guess a mishmash of internal and external hires. By far, most people are from within the legal services industry. Most. There are some exceptions where some large firms have brought on CKIOs, CIOs from outside of industry, for example, from management consultancy. And this isn't a new trend. I think that's just been the way. And I think it's great, actually. I think it's amazing to have someone with a fresh perspective, whether it's someone who was at a vendor side and is coming into a law firm, whether it's someone who's not from the industry and coming into legal practice, because law firms are odd businesses, right? They're an acquired taste, and there's a lot of things that you have to get used to and how they function, how they work, the day by day. And for someone coming in from a large organization, right? Let's say you're coming from a S&P 500 type company, even the biggest law firm is going to be a small organization by comparison. And we forget that a lot of the time. But I think there is a mix, but by far the majority are from within legal services, with probably, I would say, if I'm guessing here, something like less than 10% from outside of legal.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm sympathetic, very sympathetic to the challenges law firms face in balancing having people who understand the business of law and understand the practice of law and have a technical innovation mindset. That's kind of a unicorn. So I'm definitely seeing a lot of homegrown talent. I'm seeing a lot of people shifting who, if you follow their career path 5, 10, 15 years, you would see e-discovery, litigation support, legal operations, weaving in and out of supporting the day-to-day practice, but at a practice group level, perhaps. And then ultimately, people can roll that up into sort of a firm-wide role. But I think there's pluses to that. There might be some minuses as well, just because if we're facing AI disruption and the disruption is coming from outside, maybe a little bit of outsider perspective is helpful, but sometimes that outsider perspective, people don't quite understand what the needs are of the lawyer. And more importantly, maybe, is how you get lawyers to change what they do and how they do it. Because I think if you're used to a different sector, you may not be accustomed to some of the unique challenges of getting lawyers on board with changing their day-to-day practice.
Can I push back on that? Because I don't disagree with you, but I don't think this is specific to lawyers. I think that's just getting people to change when they're used to doing something. I would say it's probably with all knowledge workers. And I do agree that actually what's needed today from, especially as a leader in one of these roles, it does seem like a unicorn list of requirements. you need to understand change management. You may not own it directly because you hopefully can build a team around that, but you need to know what good looks like there to be able to hire a good team. You have to be a great recruiter. I mean, that's all leaders in every function in every company. You have to now be more technical than one ever used to be, right? The amount of times that I'm having conversations, especially building with AI, again, you may be working with the director of engineering, with a technical team, but you need to be at least conversant in being able to explain the requirements. So you have to be a good product person, you have to be a visionary, and then you have to be a people manager. Those are not small things.
At one point, I was creating a list of what would be the different functions of someone in this kind of role at a law firm. And very quickly, you realize it's like everything from comms to marketing to biz dev to knowledge management. That's before you even get to the real technical parts. So, definitely a unique role. And law firms they're working at it. What does a team look like, though, behind or underneath someone like that? Let's say you've got the resources to have a good innovation team lead on let's say, 800 lawyer law firm.
Yeah.
What does that support team look like? Or is it more like leveraging existing functions and picking up partial FTEs here and there?
Yeah, I think it depends on where you're starting from. You can very broadly, and I'm generalizing and simplifying massively, you can have two approaches. You can have a practice approach or you can have a central approach. And the practice approach means that you're starting to set up, you essentially have a hub and spoke model with practice innovation teams. And that means that you get better vertical alignment. So you can actually embed your practice innovation folks at a practice group level, which means that you can dig way deeper into use cases. You can actually understand the requirements better. You do have to deal with a lot of conflicting requirements because what the real estate team might want is going to be different to the litigation team, is going to be different to the corporate team, and so on. But at least you have that clarity. And that's one approach. And by the way, I don't think there is a good approach. It's part of this is dependent on the culture of the firm as well. If you're going down the practice innovation route, ideally or usually you do get some SMEs in there. So there could be that there used to be an associate or a partner, or they did something in that practice. So they do understand the work a bit more deeply. The alternative approach in this simplified universe where you can only have two options is to have a more centralized flow. So you have central innovation across the firm. And if you're a very large firm, that may be centralized to a region or a country, but centralized nonetheless. And it just requires a lot more work to gather use cases, to be able to the training, the change exercises, and the rest. The challenge there is you have to still come up with as many different narratives as the practice innovation team, but you're dealing with spreading that with a smaller team without being able to embed as deeply. So sometimes that does mean that patterns are easier to see across the firm and you can really tackle the big boulders, but it will take longer, in my view, to get deep integration at a practice level. You'll get the early adopters, you might even get the late majority, but going beyond that is going to take a very, very long time because there's no one there who can say, I understand exactly how you work. And they can speak their language verbatim to bring them along, especially for people who are naturally resistant to change.
Yeah, you have to have those solutions bubble up from the bottom, from the people who are actually doing the work and the people who actually run into the problems that need to be solved day to day. And at the same time, you of course need something centralized for the technical support, for the budget, for strategic alignment, et cetera. Where that sweet spot is, I'm sure every law firm is figuring it out on their own. On the technical side, if you were the newly minted chief innovation officer at a law firm, and you were paying close attention the last few weeks or a couple months to developments in the foundation models, the LLMs that underpin all the tools that we see out there, right? And you were starting to see Claude making a harder push into what I call, I guess, the legal vertical, for lack of a better word. What should that be telling me? And does that require me to course correct in some way and thinking about how to approach innovation at the law firm? Or is it just a question of like, okay, instead of this tool, you're using that one?
I would be watching things closely. So hopefully in that role, I'm already someone who probably not at an organization level, but at least at a personal level or for my team, we're constantly playing with all the models, right? I just don't see yet a world where there's a clear winner, whether it's Anthropic, whether it's OpenAI, whether it's Gemini or something else. I think there's too much still to be determined, and the changes continue to happen on a daily or weekly basis. So you just have to keep on your toes. At the same time, I'm probably not running out to change every time there's a new model update. So it depends on what I have today, right? If I have, and we have tooling that we built, then hopefully we built the tooling in a way that we can run experiments, we can run evaluations to see, well, is 4.7 better than 5.5? Sorry, Opus 4.7 better than GPT 5.5 at some of the tasks that we have to do. And it might be that you're using both. You may have to. In my work, I do. Or are you realizing one is just significantly better and the improvements over the other are marginal and it's just not worth changing the flow? So there's so many things that you're just sitting there. I do think that if you have, and I spoke about this on my podcast yesterday with an episode that'll come out in the future. If you do have one of the big legal tech vendors, the Harveys, Lagoras of the world and such, you're starting to think about, or some of the other companies, you're starting to think about, well, what's the moat? What do they offer that I'm not getting through the Claude for Word plugin or the Claude? Yeah.
Let me propose one. This is obviously a huge conversation now. And so I want to sort of stress test a couple of points that I've heard made or things I've been thinking about. One is, if I wanted to maintain optionality, flexibility on the foundational models that I'm building on top of, or that I'm using in some way to solve problems at a law firm, is there a tech stack that I can build out that maintains that flexibility? Or should I stick around with one of these large legal tech platforms for a little while and see how things shake out? And then maybe hope that I haven't locked myself in too deep with any particular vendor and still be able to choose a different approach based on where things play out with the LLM. Is there a way to build out a tech stack that is not vendor dependent, let's say, that maintains that optionality so that if ChatGPT has a really good 6 months, I can take advantage of that?
So here's my hot take. I think most firms are not in a position to build. And it's not that they can't build. It's firms think about, and most people think about the building phase. And the building phase is fun. It's so exciting. You get to gather requirements. People tell you all these features. You have ideas and you get to bring them to life. Unfortunately, that's the easy part, right? The hard part is the ongoing maintenance. And a mutual friend of ours, Matt, had, I think, Michael Kennedy on the podcast talking about Adelshah Goddard and some of the work they've done. And they were talking about, they went the build route and they've done it right, because they were talking about the team they've had to build out around the solution. And you are now running a software development business inside of a law firm, which for most firms, they're just not equipped for today. Can they do it? Absolutely. Should they do it? Questionable, unless you're willing to make that choice, because you need to hire product people, you need to hire engineers, you have to think about uptime, you have to think about maintenance. Every time there's model releases, you have to think about testing, things breaking, support, all of the things that software vendors like myself, we think about, you now have to think about that as part of your core IT infrastructure or innovation infrastructure. And for most firms, that is just not something that they are set up for today. And I don't think most should go there. But if that optionality is high value for you, where you want the flexibility of switching models to be able to experiment fully, absolutely go down that path, knowing what else is required to be able to manage that. And I think to me, that's the key question. It's not whether you should do it or not, it's whether you're willing to put in the work around that to be able to sustain that long term. Because we've seen it too many times, not just with large language models, but just core IT in the past too, where firms go down the path of building tools. They just feel like we can build something better environment, and it just doesn't work, right?
I certainly agree. The underlying assumption of what you're saying is AI offers an opportunity for law firms to have another competitive differentiator, but I'm not sure if the incremental advantage today is big for building versus buying. However, this is where the question comes in.
Yeah.
That seems like short-term thinking to me. It seems like if you look into a longer time horizon, you have to worry more about a couple things. One is, am I going to have a better competitive differentiator by building and not being too dependent on the same tools that my other peer firms are using? So there's one question is, medium to long term, does that advantage of building actually get bigger over time? Two is the vendor lock-in issue around if I go too hard on the buy approach, am I risking something by being locked in with the vendors? What are some of the considerations for medium and long term that might actually cause a firm to think, okay, I need to make an investment now in building because I want to have a payoff in 2-3 years, even if that investment's not a huge payoff right now?
Well, I think it's a capability question, right? So at the base of it, do you have the capability to be able to do that? Because the investment isn't just a time investment, it's also investment in resources and taking people away from supporting something or hiring more people. And then the support costs overall. So most firms that I know, they don't mind spending the money on a solution off the shelf if it solves a problem. Where people get a bit confused is they want something really specific, right? They just have such a niche use case that they can't find a off-the-shelf solution that serves 100% of that. And then you have to question, is 80%, 85%, 90% good enough, right? Because the extra 5, 10% is going to cost you 3 years. And in that 3 years, you still have no other solution. So sometimes the smarter thing might be to do things in parallel and think about that. But I still go back to building. It's not the problem. It's the maintenance, but long term. And the second is, even if the vendor lock-in part, I get that. I think with a lot of AI tools, specifically the AI native tools, most firms are signing single year contracts. So they're not signing 2-3 year or more contract. I've heard that from CIOs and CKIOs. That's reasonable because things are moving so fast, right? And it might be that they switch from vendor to vendor in that time, or they have to continue evaluating the market. The reality is, if you're a firm, we'll use your example from earlier, a 700 lawyer firm, you buy a tool today, the fact that you think you're going to be able to fully deploy and get enough adoption of that tool within a 6-12 month period, that's a bit ambitious. Not that it's not possible, but again, do you have the team to be able to have that kind of rollout, right? Through all the testing, the integrations, and everything else. By the time you roll that out, you're in month 9 of 12, right? And at that point, you're likely at least extending a little bit to be able to do that. And I think it's the indecision that kills people here, which is they spend a year basically contemplating this question of buy versus build. And in that time, people still have those problems that they're wasting time on, and you're getting left behind. And not just that, but you're losing really precious time in training your users on how to think in a way that these modern tools and these modern processes require. So there are other opportunity costs through inaction, and that's what I would focus on more than which path you choose. Do something rather than nothing.
I think I might have had a blind spot in how I think about some of these big name sort of legal tech tools, because I was too focused on thinking of them based on the features they offer.
Sure.
But I'm starting to think more and more that maybe the value they really are trying to offer is more as an infrastructure layer, as a build layer, as a place where you can build automations, you can build solutions that are in some ways bespoke to what you need as a law firm, but you know they're going to work. You don't have to deal with the maintenance, right? You don't have to deal with those issues. Is that the right way to think about these tools?
Maybe. So I think I'll speak for us as Loophole, right? We want that. We want to reduce the friction in what we offer to our users. So you can build solutions, you can build automation, and all of these without the technical lift, right? That means that we have to, at a product, at an engineering, at a UI UX level, do all of that work on our side. So it's easy for the users. And I think other tools also want to get there, because you get not quite end to end, but end to end within a specific use case or workflow. And I think that is powerful. What I think the future holds, and I'm just going to predict and say something bold, and either I'll look amazing in a year or completely foolish, is you now have to build with the agentic enterprise in mind. And what I mean by that is today, most tools are built for human use. In the future, we need to continue to do that, but each of those tools should also be built for agentic use. That means that you need to expose endpoints, MCP servers, whatever you're doing, in a way that an agent can effectively and efficiently use the tool. And we're starting to see that in the broader market, right? Salesforce, I think, in the last couple of weeks, said you can now interact with the entirety of Salesforce without ever needing to log into Salesforce. Loophole is the same thing. You can use Loophole without ever needing to go into Loophole itself. You have an account. All you need is to be able to communicate through Claude or Perplexity or your LLM of choice through MCP. We become that infrastructure, that database layer. So you have multiple different surfaces to be able to talk to your tool. And I think that has to be where things are moving, because for most enterprises, law firms included, at some point, they're going to have a swarm of agents, and your life is managing those agents. And those agents need tooling to be able to do that task.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a tough one. Let's move to where the hockey puck is as a law firm, right? Let's anticipate everything you're saying, the agentic AI, all of it. And I come to you and I say, I want to be in that top right quadrant, and I want to innovate, and I want to differentiate with innovation, and I want to be able to automate my own workflows, deploy my own agents, leverage my own data, all these things. But I want to avoid getting locked into a vendor. I want to remain flexible with which LLM I'm using. I do need a build layer of some kind. What are my options? Maybe something like a Harvey or Agora is one option, right? Maybe short-term, maybe long-term, depends on your needs. Another end of the extreme is, here's a big budget. I hope you have a lot of money because you need to build out all of these teams and you're going to have to all this.
Right.
What else is in between those two versions, or what other options are there?
You can have that compromise of having the build layer where you're building the front end for your users, for lack of a better word, right? Whether that's through agent orchestration, whether it's through actual UI UX, and that is connecting to other tooling. So you do have a amount of vendor lock-in. So you have different vendors that have highly specific functionality, right? Whether it's doing doc auto, whether it's doing redlining, whether it's the research piece, whether it's project management, but the users don't need to worry about that. So what you're doing is you're creating that middleware yourself as the firm. So you own and control that. It's less of what you have to do because now you can make that very much hyper specific to your users, give them that tailored experience, but you don't have to build all of the other tooling to take actions, right? So if you need to do research, you don't have to build a research platform. You're just calling onto that platform that gives you the results. And that's what I was suggesting before is going to be the world. So I think that gives you the best of
Mm.
both worlds, where you own the experience, but you don't need to own all of the intelligence and the tooling around the experience. And I think that could work pretty well. It's not easy. It sounds very easy, but it's not easy. And there's a lot of variables in play. But I think that's a nice, happy medium because there's no reason for you to reinvent the wheel, right? And if I put it into, I guess, Web 2.0 terms, it's kind of like building something using libraries that exist out there in the world. So you're not reinventing the video codec experience to play video files. You're just like, cool, I have videos and I'm just going to use this library for playback. I'm going to use this library for transcription or whatever it might be, but you're designing around that. And I think that's the kind of experience that you can work towards.
I like the middleware analogy and language. So let me stick with that. Let's say I'm at a law firm, I have an antitrust practice, and we do a lot of M&A work for clients. We help them get through these regulatory procedures to get clearances for their deals, et cetera. And I have a bunch of like secret sauce stuff that I do. I'm like a really good lawyer doing this. And
Yeah.
I have like my way of doing it. I have a really great process. I have a great way of getting information from the client. I have a great way of getting that information into the formats that we need to fill out the forms. And I have a really great team and a process for reviewing the documentation that the clients give me to pull out and extract the relevant information. I have a whole bunch of secret sauce, okay? And so I want that secret sauce to live in the middleware space. I want it to be mine. I don't want that to sit on a platform that might be able to use that and offer it in some way to a competitor. Can you just help me understand from a technical perspective, what is the middleware that enables that universe where I get to keep that secret sauce for myself?
So I think that's just the proprietary data that you have, right? Whether it's at an individual level. So I think if you think about it from you got the foundation level, right? That's the intelligence, and everyone shares that. So you're using a frontier model, let's say, for example, you do that. On top of that, you have your tooling. So these could be the specific tools that get called upon depending on what's needed. And then above that, it's your own context, your proprietary information, your secret source. And you want to architect things in a way that you have the full context, but that's not used to train the rest. Because again, to your point, you've developed this secret sauce over the years and you don't need the recipe falling into people's hands. But I don't think that needs to transport into the other one. You take enough context from one to pass on to the different levels, but you're never really, you're presumably looking at some other contracts and saying, do not use any of my prompts and other things for training purposes, both with the frontier level, frontier models or with other tools. And two, you're not actually passing all of that information in there. So I think by design, most of those kinds of things will be there, but I think that's a design choice. I think architecturally, technically, it's not, I don't want to say it's not complicated. Everything is complicated, but for competent people, which I'm not one, it's not as complicated. But I think it's a design choice. And I think for most tools today, even now, that happens, right? Your secret sauce remains your secret sauce, but you can get to an outcome, right? If you're putting something in a Copilot or Perplexity, you're still able to get answers if you have an enterprise plan without having to worry about, okay, is this information being leaked into, and are my competitors or other adjacent people fitting from that? So I think it's a thing to think about, but I don't think it's as much of an issue as most people think it is.
I like the kind of architectural layers you set out. Help me understand kind of how Loophole fits into that structure. Like where would you be eliminating those frictions that you mentioned earlier?
So we're probably in the tooling. We're probably in the tooling layer. So, well, we are in the tooling layer. So today you can interact with Loophole directly through a platform, right? So you go to the web app, you log in, and you have a beautiful UI, and you can do things there. More and more, we focus on how do we interact with Loophole from where you are spending your time, and that can still at a UI level from, let's say, Outlook, because most lawyers live in Outlook, or it could be, hey, I use Claude for all of my work. I live in Cowork, or I live in just Claude on the web. I want to be able to just get the information. So Loophole is a project management tool. It's got a list of your deliverables, your tasks, your dates and deadlines. I don't need to deal with that every day. So I can set up, for example, I have a skill in my Claude instance where at the start of the day, I say brief, and it will look through my inbox to see all the emails that came in overnight because I'm on the West Coast, and that means most of the world is already awake and active before the time I wake up. And it can tell me, here are the emails, here are some that seem important that you should focus on. It's looking at my Loophole matters to tell me, here are the deadlines, and here are some matters that have things happening urgently. Here's some activity. So I think that's where we sit in. I never have to open Loophole for that. If I want to make changes, so I complete something, I can just say, hey, this is done, mark this as complete. Or let's say this was a client call. I can actually put the transcript of our meeting, assuming that we recorded it, or just my stream of consciousness post-meeting that I just speak to Claude and just say, update my matter. So that's what I mean by the tooling becomes, so Loophole in that case is really acting as a database, a system of record that's still connected to my DMS and other places, but I'm never opening the app a lot of the times. I'm just using that to track that, and it becomes a persistent memory that I can always call on to say, what's the latest, what's happened, because it's not just me, other people are taking action in that matter, and I just get proactively notified as needed.
Are there any other ways that you think law firms should be thinking about how to achieve the movement up to that ideal quadrant, change management side, or on the culture sort of shift? Or are there any other maybe like less tangible, more subjective factors that you think play into law firms' ability to succeed in that way?
So I think just gathering use cases and actually doing the discovery work of understanding what are the core problems that we should try and solve is important. Having a layer of governance will also help. These are both objectives, just so you can take action quickly. You have your CISOs and IGs in a way that that makes sense, so you can get things through relatively pain-free. And then I think subjective is the culture. It's the work that you do always around making sure that people are open and willing to experiment with technology, that you're putting a culture in place, which is the market is changing quickly and we need to be educated. We need to be informed, not just so we can utilize it, but at a bare minimum, your clients are going to ask you these questions. And don't you want to be the person who's able to at least have an intelligent conversation, who's able to talk to them around what is the impact of X and Y? This is how we're thinking about it, rather than the client says, well, I heard about this open Claude MS agent, and you're like, I don't know what those words mean, right? Doesn't mean that you have to use those things, but you should be knowledgeable enough to be able to say, yep, we know what those are. We're tracking that, and we'll move if and when it makes sense for us to be able to do. So I think that's just an ongoing education piece. And with that, it means you're not just thrusting upon people sudden change, because they're now at least aware of these principles, and hopefully you're chipping away at things slowly by slowly. And you hopefully just open people up to be looking at things, and they might, because it just takes one use case where they're like, wait, I can do this. For me, it's, wait, I can just put my notes in something and it updates all of my trackers and checklists. I don't have to manually do that. That's huge, because that takes hours, right? So that's a use case that resonates with me. For someone else, it may just be, wait, I can use a morning brief skill to just know which emails came in and which ones should be high priority automatically, like magic. Amazing, right? Like and some of these are very simple, technically and otherwise. So it's just, it's taking an increased amount of shots on goal.
I'll maybe add one more idea, which is lawyers would benefit a lot from talking to each other about what they're doing on this front. I'm not sure that as a community, practicing lawyers and law firms are very open about these things. I think it might be a bit of the nature of the business to be a little bit more careful, do things maybe behind closed doors and let the results speak for themselves. But whatever the reason might be, I don't think law firms are very out in the open about having discussions about what's working, what's not, exchanging ideas, communing on the topic of the innovation. Where do you think are the best places for lawyers or law firms to try to do that more?
I don't know. If you find that answer, that we should do something about that. But I think just generally, I would say LinkedIn, just talking to people, just reach out. I think share ideas, ask for help. There's the old story of you go to a large city, you go to a building. On the 15th floor is law firm 1, on the 16th is law firm 2. The person on the 16th floor solved the problem that the person on the 15th floor had 6 months ago, and they're just going to battle through it just because they never talk to each other. So I think that still extends. So I think there are now at least more active discourse happening on LinkedIn, on Reddit, and places like that. So I think just being mindful of just actually being open to sharing some learnings. And I know a lot of people feel hesitant about that because that's just what lawyers are like. We don't want to share sort of failures and failed experiments, but sometimes it's important to do that. But yeah, I think and of course, if you go to conferences or symposiums or whatever it might be, those are really good places. So picking up the phone and just, not everything needs to be, as much as you and I love podcasts, not everything needs to be public, but sometimes just picking up the phone and just asking people, I saw that you worked on this problem. Would you mind just sharing a little bit more? I've found that overwhelming amount of people are extremely happy to help and share what took them from A to B.
I completely agree with that. I think the one-on-one is extremely valuable. In some ways, it seems like we are emerging from a social media fog, not just as lawyers, but as humans, and rediscovering the value of in-person and one-on-one interaction. Yeah. I'll say that I attend conferences, and no disrespect to any particular conference, but it's rare that the substantive aspects of the conference, the panels, are really the valuable part. I think often it's the meetings on the sideline, it's the one-on-ones where the really interesting insight come from. And that's okay. We should embrace that. We don't need the conference itself to be a huge hit if the right people attend, and then they make those connections in the sidelines. So to answer your question, what can we do? My personal mission is to bring back in person. So I guess being in New York helps. You're in the Bay Area?
I'm in Orange County.
Orange County. Okay.
So if anyone wants to meet up in Orange County, hit me up. I will be very glad to do that.
Well, yeah, LA must have a decent LA Metro must have a decent legal tech hub, and New York does as well. So be on the lookout for us to post some meetups or in-person gatherings.
Exactly.
This has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you coming on. Where can my listeners find you, and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah. Find me on LinkedIn. That's where I tend to post the most. And you can also find me on Loophole. We are a project management software for law firms and legal teams. Otherwise, yeah, please connect with me. If I can help with anything, let me know. For any of you that want to take the assessment to figure out where you are in the maturity quadrant, it's on my LinkedIn, and hopefully it will be in the show notes. But please do that. And yeah, wonderful to be on the podcast and have the conversation. I think things are moving quickly, and I'm excited to see what happens in the next 6 months.
And what is Fringe Legal?
Yes, Fringe Legal. That's my passion project. It's a podcast. We just launched a new season where I talk to innovators that are basically going through the change of AI transformation. And it's an occasional newsletter where I also share some thoughts. So thank you for that. Yeah, I found on frangelegal.com.
Excellent. Very cool. Lots of places to find you and learn about your insights. So thanks again, Ab. Really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much.